Have you ever seen someone from a non-traditional or even non-technical background ever truly succeed in these deep tech environments?
Yeah, I mean, like my intern, the intern that I just mentioned, right? Which we hired in January, he had no background in machine learning whatsoever. I mean, obviously, I'm being a little facetious here because there's an extra level of skill required to work in machine learning just above coding. But as far as his capabilities, he could only just code. Like he didn't have that background in data analytics and machine learning, which is more of a researchy science than just coding up something and it's there. So in that sense, he didn't have that kind of background. If I'm not mistaken, in at U of T, I think he did data science, which is at most data analytics. Um, and he told me like, look, I don't have a background in machine learning, but I'll give it a try. And we had a couple of calls over Christmas discussing what he wanted to try and how he wanted to do it. And I said, look, the easiest way to do it is put it in a notebook, just show me how you did things, let me run it, and then we can just talk about it. So the one thing I look for is not necessarily the background or the school or the program or what have you. I think that's what you're sort of getting at. I look at their ability to learn and to be a little bit scrappy. So what I noticed with him is that even though his code was a little messy, he was scrappy and he was trying out different things. And that told me right away that even if he doesn't know anything about machine learning, he'll pick it up. Because that's what I need is somebody who can pick up something new and is willing to make mistakes and also be communicative about the roadblocks he faces. Because I don't want him to basically be banging his head against a wall and not telling anybody about it. I mean, I know it's a little bit outside of what you're talking about, but if we're talking about like as somebody who's truly non-technical, it takes a lot of work. It takes some time to get acquainted with this industry. Like I can tell you, I had a basic to intermediate programming ability coming out of school, and I had to I learned on the job. So due to various circumstances, I couldn't pursue my master's after going to art school, and I had to get a job. So but I had to also be flexible as well in my own life. So I picked up some contacts that I had at Waterloo to do just some basic data analytics work, stuff that is, closer to what I knew coming out of school. But then as time goes on and as I got more work from various companies, clients, and what have you, I slowly built up that skill set because I had to. I had to perform a job or meet a certain brief based on what the client gave me. And I did that for 3.5 years straight, just doing that. So that's how I actually built up my machine learning ability. It's not by going to school. It was literally being thrown into it on the deep end and having to figure my way out through it. And I was very communicative with the people I was working with, but they also knew that the work I do generally is of high quality. So if I don't know it now, I'll probably figure it out, but I was just communicative, and I look for others who can do the same.
I'm always curious to ask this because of how ambitious founders are, but were there hesitations when it came to those big moments like interviewing at YC, or did you simply view them as steps in the journey that had to happen no matter what?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's not linear when you learn. Like, if I couldn't figure something out, I would beat my head against a wall and, obviously get all types of frustrated on it. But at the end of the day, especially when there's money and a livelihood that is that is on the line, I had to figure it out. You know, um, and in doing so, I also had to look for help as well. So you'd be surprised how many times I had 100 tabs open with all sorts of Stack Overflow tickets trying to fix some of my problems as far as implementing machine learning or data and some some sort of task that my clients had asked for. So it's not like you have to look for help next door. There are people online that are helpful as well. The beauty about the software engineering machine learning community is that they document a lot of stuff online, and there's a lot of stuff that's open source. And in fact, if you're brave enough, you can actually contact the authors of some of the pieces that people write. So in that sense, The resources are there. I mean, but it takes a certain amount of humility to realize that you're very wrong and you need help. But as I mentioned before, I'm quite used to that now.
There's a great line by Vinod Khosla, and he says, "The reason I succeed is because I've failed more than anybody else." And I really do think that's a big reason why some people do well, is because they aren't afraid to put themselves out there. They aren't afraid to stick out their necks, and they're okay if things don't work because they'll figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, like if we're gonna be real, like real, starting a startup, especially in the early days, is tough. If you're not willing to go without pay for 2 years, or even after going without pay for 2 years, you realize that you don't have a business. You need to be able to, you need to have the strength, courage to do something like that, because that's how startup life is. There are lots of companies out there, that start as a rocket ship and continue being a rocket ship. But the truth of the matter is, especially for a lot of companies in the deep tech space, that's just not true. And there are personal sacrifices that you have to make for what you're trying to create, right? The question is the idea worth it? And do you have the courage to go this long haul and go through the absolute lows of doing the startup? I just happen to be the type of person who's so uncomfortable all the time that I'm kind of used to it.
I like that though. I think being antsy and always wanting to do more is a good thing. A question that I had about pitching is, when approaching people with the vision that you had, was it difficult for them to get behind the fact that it was a long-term play? Like, would you say these markets have gotten receptive over the last decade, or have they remained the same?
Yeah, I would say it's the latter. It's more of the same. I can't tell you the number of times that people have told me, no, this is not going to work. No, thanks. You know, outside of raising the money that we did raise, there were plenty more people who said, yeah, this is not for me. Or, they say no for other reasons besides just, the idea itself. Sometimes they don't know mining. Sometimes they don't like my pedigree. Sometimes they just don't like anything deep tech in general. And that's okay. You just have to find the people who are willing to back you up. But the truth of the matter is that in order to get people to buy into the vision, especially something that is so outside of their own reality, like mining and AI, people just can't seem to connect the two. If I just said those two words, would you have understood what I was saying? After doing this for so long and hopefully getting so deep into the subject matter, you hope you can be proficient enough, like a skill, that you can explain it and teach it to somebody else. So when we talk about, let's take the investor example. When we talk to investors, the first thing I generally have to do is figure out how much they know about mining first. So I've had people who have some exposure to mining, and I've had people who didn't even realize that copper came out of the ground. I've seen it all. So if I know where they're at, I can meet them where they're at, and then explain it to them in a way that makes sense. So using the latter example where the person didn't know that copper came out of the ground, I told them that 50% of your phone is made from materials that come out of the ground. Mining is this huge industry that is really not visible to most people. It just so happens that being from Toronto, you are very exposed to mining. To make them believe that if they don't understand mining, that you understand mining, and that you're in the right place and right time to do something about something in mining. In that sense, just having that conversation, getting them up to speed, and then letting them know, like, look, there's a reason why this is a legacy industry. This is not going to be that rocket ship that you can exit out of 7 years. It's not going to be that. But the opportunity is so large that it could revolutionize an entire industry that feeds every other industry. That's how you have to feed it. You have to make it relevant to their reality again.
So, for those who aren't familiar with the industry, can you talk about some of the rules and regulations that are in place? Like, is the battle getting your foot in the door, or is the real one to be had once you get into that inner circle in the industry?
The industry is pretty opaque, I gotta say. It is they're not very public about the way they do business. They're not particular PR mavens unless you're in the mining industry world where they, sort of PR to each other. Getting into the industry and getting trust is hard, and getting yourself up to date or getting yourself up to speed as to how mining works and how the process generally is from start to finish is not easy. And I would still say to this day, I don't think our team truly knows that. Mostly it's a consequence of COVID because we haven't had a long enough time on a mine site. We can't go on mines because of the COVID restrictions and all that. But I think once we do, it'll give others and myself probably a little bit more clarity on what we can do. As far as what we needed to know to start this company, we knew there was a problem in the industry just from our own personal backgrounds. Both, when I say our, I mean Daniel and myself, where mining was a topic of conversation at our respective dinner tables. So in that sense, we were not completely naive to the influence of mining in the world. As far as getting to how we apply AI, that was a little bit more difficult, but we were lucky enough to have good partners within U of T, just professors who are willing to chat with us and give us a full-on breakdown on a whiteboard on how mining works. And what we realized is that there is a gap in the market where the way people guess or model out what's in the ground and how much has been the same for about 60 years. That in itself leads to all sorts of inefficiencies from the beginning of a mine's life all the way up to a net. Because if you don't know with any certainty what's in the ground and how much, you can imagine how wasteful mining can truly be. And that's obviously a topic of conversation that's more surface to the world. But the root cause is that you just don't know where your stuff is. So when we decided to tackle this particular issue, we were tackling it from a mindset that if the data is of good quality, it may have some other issues, but is of generally good quality, then we should be able to, the machine learning algorithms we create should be able to learn the patterns in the ground better than what a geologist can do. So in a sense, there is a bit of serendipity there as far as learning the industry, but getting like one side of the industry versus the other side being meaning outside versus inside, it's the same sort of difficulty because it's still opaque and it's still very much a club. So breaking into that means that you have to provide something truly game changer for them. And that's what we've done.
The last thing I wanted to ask was for non-technical people. Where can they go to learn more about the industries you've worked in? Do you typically follow specific subject materials, specific researchers? What do you typically look at?
I do not follow the researcher, I follow the research. I do not, this is sort of counterintuitive, but I don't necessarily listen to talks, I listen to lectures. I'm not interested in a pedigree per se, I'm interested in the idea. Maybe this is a pure researcher in me. I love to listen to Perimeter Institute's public lectures. Their public lecture series are pretty good. They're sort of skew on the physics bend, but it's very accessible to a non-technical audience. So I like to listen to things like that because I just generally just enjoy it. I think the thing is you need to find something that you enjoy and then just deep dive into it just for your own personal happiness, interest, whatever. Because generally speaking, if you deep dive into something, you will find gaps in you'll create your own knowledge base and your own view of that entire field. And then you can find gaps or, tackle a specific problem that you're truly interested in the same way that a researcher would in the lab. There's no reason that you need to go to school. I'm again being a little bit biased here because I haven't gone to school after bachelor's. I'd love to at some point, but I don't think you necessarily need somebody to teach you to be able to get acquainted with a certain field of study. So there is an example I actually have, which somebody asked me to pull out for them. Somebody asked me what lectures or what would I want to read if I wanted to learn more about quantum computing. And the first thing I usually do is give them a link for the Feynman lectures on physics. So these are available to everybody through the Caltech University website. You can just read through the transcript and follow the notes, and you just listen to the lecture. I personally enjoy it because this is something I truly love. Like I really like reading about these things, but this is not just relegated to just physics or something as purely theoretical as what I'm doing. If you're interested in agriculture, then start reading. Doesn't matter what. If you're interested in specifically cherry agriculture, that's what you read first. I tend not to listen to talks about people doing things. Everybody's experience is different. I can't map my life to this person's life, and nor can they map their life to mine. I can just learn about certain paths that they took that would have made their lives easier in their own journey. So there's one nugget I heard. It was don't fall in love with your idea. Now, if you ask me who said that, I have no idea, but it stuck. So I go after the information, not the informer.
That's it. I want to thank Farzi from StratumAI for coming on today, especially for this long to talk about our industry with us. I'm Cassius Felicella, and this is the Homeroom Podcast. Be sure to check us out on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter at Homeroom Podcast. Thanks for listening.